Megan had just moved into a small old apartment on the outskirts of town. The rent was cheap, and she didn't mind the creaky floors or the outdated fixtures. There was, however, one thing that unsettled her: the mirror in the hallway. It was an antique, its wooden frame intricately carved with twisting vines and faces that seemed to watch her as she walked by. Megan considered taking it down, but it was bolted firmly to the wall. Besides, she figured it added a bit of character to the place. That night, as Megan was brushing her teeth, she caught a glimpse of something in the mirror. She paused, staring into the reflection. The hallway behind her looked normal, but then she saw it. A shadow just out of sight darting across the hallway. Her heart raced as she whipped around, but there was nothing there. "It's just my imagination," she told herself, shaking her head. She finished brushing her teeth and went to bed, trying to dismiss the eerie feeling. The next few days were uneventful, though she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. Every time she passed the mirror, she felt an inexplicable urge to look into it, but she forced herself not to. One night, after a long day at work, Megan collapsed onto the couch. She had just started to drift off when she heard a faint whisper. Her eyes snapped open and she sat up, listening carefully. The apartment was silent, but the whispering continued, low and indistinct, as if coming from far away. She followed the sound to the hallway. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, and it was coming from the mirror. Megan's hands trembled as she reached out and touched the cold glass. The moment her fingers made contact, the whispering stopped. A chill ran down her spine. She stared at her reflection, but something was off. The figure in the mirror wasn't quite her. It looked like her, but its eyes were hollow, dark voids that seemed to bore into her soul. Suddenly, the reflection smiled, a cruel, twisted grin that made Megan's blood run cold. She stumbled back, heart pounding, and ran into her bedroom, slamming the door behind her. She sat on the edge of the bed, trying to calm her racing thoughts. That night, she barely slept, plagued by nightmares of the mirror and the twisted version of herself trapped inside it. The next morning, she decided she couldn't live with it any longer. Megan grabbed a hammer and marched to the hallway. She hesitated for a moment, staring at the mirror, but then she raised the hammer and swung. The glass shattered, pieces flying everywhere. But instead of relief, a cold dread filled her as she realized the mirror wasn't empty. Behind the shards of broken glass, a dark, gaping void stared back at her. And from that void, a figure began to crawl out. It was her reflection, or at least it had been. Now it was twisted, contorted, with limbs that were too long and eyes that glowed with an unnatural light. Megan froze in terror as the creature stepped out of the mirror, its twisted smile stretching impossibly wide. The air in the room seemed to chill instantly, every breath becoming visible. It whispered her name, voiced like nails on a chalkboard, and reached out with elongated fingers, dripping with a dark, viscous substance that reeked of decay. Her heart pounded like a trapped animal in her chest. She turned to run, but it was too late. The last thing Megan felt was a cold hand wrapping around her ankle, its grip like iron. The creature's touch was suffocatingly cold, dragging her back towards the shattered remains of the mirror, each piece reflecting the terror in her eyes. Darkness consumed her vision as she was pulled through the void, a place where time seemed to stand still, and sound was a distant memory. Her screams were swallowed by the abyss, leaving only silence and the haunting feel of the creature's touch. She desperately clawed at the air, but there was no escape from the relentless pull of the mirror. Days later, the landlord visited the apartment after not hearing from Megan. The place was eerily silent, the kind of quiet that sets your nerves on edge. Everything seemed meticulously in place, as if untouched by human hand, except for the mirror, which had been inexplicably repaired, almost gleaming in the dim light, hanging as if nothing had happened. As he approached the mirror, a sense of unease crawled up his spine. He felt compelled to look into it, drawn by an unseen force. And when he did, for just a second, he thought he saw Megan's reflection, her eyes wide with fear. She was smiling back at him, but it wasn't quite right. Her smile mirrored the creature's, twisted and unnaturally wide. He blinked, shaking his head to clear the unsettling image. But the mirror only reflected his own bewildered face now. Doubt gnawed at the edge of his mind, but he dismissed it as a trick of the light. Yet, the feeling of being watched lingered, an unshakable presence that seemed to emanate from the depths of the mirror. Days turned into weeks, and the landlord couldn't rid himself of the feeling that something was wrong. Whispers followed him in the darkness, and shadows seemed to move just out of sight. He avoided the mirror but couldn't bring himself to remove it. Each glance in its direction sent a shiver down his spine, as if the mirror was waiting for the right moment to reveal its secrets. The apartment remained vacant, and soon stories began to circulate about the haunted mirror and the terrifying disappearance of Megan. Each person who rented the apartment afterward reported strange occurrences, whispers in the night, and an oppressive cold that seemed to emanate from the mirror. It became a legend, a cautionary tale of a mirror that held more than just reflections.